Insomniac Spider-Man is one of my favorite games, and one of my all-time favorite Spider-Man stories. As someone who grew up with the Raimi movies and played a lot of Spider-Man, I was drawn to the character for different reasons over the years. I never lost interest because as I grew up, I kept finding a new appreciation for the character. He wasn't just this cool superhero that I thought he was as a kid. He was a flawed human being that tries to do the right thing even when he doesn't want to or when it's detrimental to him. He fails and he keeps going. He puts his responsibilities to others on top of his personal life, which ultimately costs him. Peter has his family as a moral compass. That's where he found his code as a superhero. In Uncle Ben's "With great power comes great responsibility" and Aunt May's "When you help someone, you help everyone." But in the game, Peter also has another role model in Otto Octavius. Peter believes that he can help even more people through science, and Otto is his inspiration for that part of his life. As Peter's role models, there's a lot of depth to be explored with his relationship with those characters. Spoilers for the first game ahead. Peter is portrayed perfectly in the game. Right at the start, we see him getting a notice of eviction because of rent payment. He hesitates for a moment but ends up doing the right thing knowing it would cost him. He doesn't have time to deal with all of that right now because the moment he was waiting for a long time has come. After years, he would finally see Kingpin behind bars. So he leaves the apartment and goes after him. Getting his personal life messed up because of the prioritization of his responsibilities as a superhero is a cornerstone of the character. We even get a whole mission afterwards where we have to track Peter's stuff in the trash because he got evicted. He's not even worried about the stuff he lost, he's mostly worried about the thumb drive with years of Spidey work on it. Kingpin being captured leaves a power vacuum, and even though he's a really bad guy, he has a code and manages to maintain an order of sorts. He questions the futility of Spider-Man's actions in capturing him because that void would eventually be filled by someone worse. Peter feels like it's his responsibility to help others, but he has a hard time accepting help. He's proud, but only in trying to make it on his own and trying not to ask others for help. There are many examples of this throughout the game, like when Aunt May tried to offer him money and he tried to refuse it, or that time when he's homeless and doesn't want to take feast resources from others in need. The whole dynamic of the breakup with MJ comes from him not wanting to put her in danger and not accepting help because of it. Peter's journey in the game is to come to understand that he can't bear all the weight alone. He needs to accept help and accept the fact that he's not going to be the only one in danger, doesn't matter how hard he tries. We see the result of this character arc in him accepting help in the last act of the game and fighting alongside Miles in the next entries. Otto seems to have similar ideals to Peter at the beginning, but as the story progresses and the neural interface starts to exacerbate traits of his personality, we get to see that his ideals, whilst similar to Peter's on the surface, are fundamentally different and pushed to the extreme due to his hate of Norman Osborn. While Peter focuses on the threat of Mr. Negative, Otto begins the planning of his attack on Norman Osborn, and he does it right under Peter's nose. He plans the raft breakout and has a map of the prison on display, but he says he's doing security work for them. He also has a piece of Rhino's armor in the lab, but when asked about it, he says it's only an armor prototype for a Sable contract. There's an earlier moment in the game where Otto catches Peter with Spidey suit in hands. Peter thinks he's caught, but Otto just assumes Peter is the one developing Spider-Man's gadgets. So now, Peter has an excuse to have spider things out in the open lab. Otto does the same thing with his evil plans. It's funny because we have protagonists and antagonists openly sharing the same room for planning of their secret alter ego's objectives. But even so, Otto is always one step ahead. One of the things I really liked is how we can see Otto's mind getting twisted little by little. Not just through the scenes we get to see of him, but also from the audio logs he keeps around the lab. At the beginning, they're about Peter being a good and brilliant assistant, and about Otto's disease that he tries to hide. Those audio logs get progressively more interesting as he gets more hateful over time. It all culminates in the Raft breakout with the gathering of the Sinister Six and the reveal of their leader, planning from the shadows, Otto Octavius. Spider-Man gets beat up and left alive by Otto's command. When we go to the lab, we listen to the Doc's last recordings, and we actually get to see that the whole time he knew we were listening to his audio logs.
Parker, always listening, aren't you? Always observing, memorizing, stealing. Who have you told about the neural interface, About my work? Well, it stops here, Parker. I trusted you.
Peter debates if he should give up on a friend, still hoping that somehow he can change his mind. He believes there's still good in him, the man he knew who had ideals similar to him, who cared for him and would never hurt him. Both of the big villains of the game, Martin Li and Otto, have a good side shown whilst in their original identity. Both take the path of fully accepting their villainous alter ego. Almost like the shedding of a snake's skin, they leave behind their human side in search for revenge. Peter, on the other hand, seems keen on trying to make a change not only as Spider-Man but also as Peter Parker, clinging to his humanity as strongly as he can. Peter has Aunt May and Uncle Ben's ideals as cornerstones of his superhero side. Even though they serve him as a whole, they have a huge influence in why he became a superhero in the first place, and he has Otto as one of the pillars of his human side. May, always helping those in need, and Otto, making people's lives better. They are the living role models for Peter. Otto is the example of the scientist Peter wants to become. It's the way he can help people's lives not only as Spider-Man, but as a brilliant scientist. He admires his mind and his ideals and has him as a friend and a mentor. That's why watching his fall to the villain's side hurts him so badly. Eventually, Otto manages to get the Devil's Breath and release it, causing a New York epidemic. Peter goes after the Sinister Six, who are causing havoc around the city. After defeating Vulture, Electro, Rhino, and Scorpion, he goes after the Cure, facing off against Martin Li one last time. Martin is a really interesting character. He talks about the demon inside of him almost like it's a separate entity and one and the same at the same time. It's a metaphor for the bad we all have inside of us. I really don't think the demon Martin talks about is sentient. When the experiment Norman conducted on Martin gave him his powers and killed his parents, Martin blamed Norman and the demon. The demon, his power, is a metaphysical manifestation of Martin's fears as a kid. A scary story told by his father manifested in reality by Martin's powers. It might be that consciously or unconsciously, with the trauma of the death of his parents, he created the image of the demon to externalize his fear, gathering all the parts of himself that he despises. His obsession for revenge against Norman and the cursed power that he received that killed his parents. Both a direct influence of Norman's actions as one entity, the demon. Martin also talks about how his father would say he is unbalanced, and in a book we find about the demon, it states that to perfectly control the demon, we must have balance. Otherwise, the demon consumes us. He seems to get more powerful the more he gives in to anger and revenge, which serves as a perfect metaphor. The demon getting more power and eventually taking over, and the path to revenge that corrupts and changes, eventually turning him into the monster. We all have darkness inside of us, but what defines us is our actions, how we manage the bad, control it, and externalize it. Martin associated his power to revenge and called it the demon. His power would never be fully controlled, and revenge would consume him if he has no balance. Peter defeats the metaphysical manifestation of the demon, and we are left to wonder if he managed to help Martin restore balance in the process. Otto shows up and brutally beats up Peter until almost death, taking the Cure and Norman as a hostage. After receiving immediate care at Feast, barely standing, he decided to go after Otto. MJ points out that Peter developed the arms. If someone can develop something to counter it, it would be Spider-Man's friend, Peter Parker, which serves as another nod to his humanity, his desire to help others not only as Spider-Man but also as Peter. Then we get the scene where Peter designs the anti-Ox suit. I really enjoyed the scene because it's so reminiscent of the first Raimi movie when Peter is developing his first suit, and we get these transitions with designs fading in and out of the screen. During their fight, Otto demonstrates that he knew all along that Peter was Spider-Man. Peter, angry and in shock, answers,
You knew?
He probably found out at the moment when he saw Peter fixing the Spider-Man suit at the beginning of the game, maybe even before that, but concealed it as a way to manipulate Peter. Otto was one step ahead the whole time. Peter fights Otto with even more resolve. As Otto monologues about being the one who has to make the tough choices, Peter chooses to sacrifice himself in taking a possibly fatal wound so he could reach and immobilize Otto. With Otto defeated, we get to see their last conversation before Otto is sent to prison and come to know a little bit more behind Otto's twisted reasoning. How could someone with ideals so similar to Peter's have turned so bad? Otto's ideals are a twisted reflection of Peter's. He is proud like him, but his pride makes it so that he sees himself as superior to everyone else because of his intellect. He even lives by a similar code in Peter's: with great power comes great responsibility, but in his twisted vision, it's the superior's duty to help the ones beneath them. At the end of the day, he has no problem putting others in danger, and he justifies it with his superiority in being the one who has to make the tough choice, and with his rationale in reducing possible lives lost as only a calculated negligible number, a necessary sacrifice to reach the greater good. As a last desperate attempt, he asks Peter for mercy, for help. He says that the arms affected his mind, but they could work it out, fix him, that he couldn't go to prison stuck on a progressively worse body without the help of the arms. Peter considers trying to help his fallen friend, but then Otto finishes with,
And of course, you rest easy, knowing your secret is safe with me.
Peter realizes that he was just trying to manipulate him again by promising to keep his identity as long as he doesn't go to prison. Peter walks away with a heavy heart, whilst his former friend screams his name in the background, with Otto shown in the scene almost like a tragic monster from an old horror movie. Peter goes back to May, who is barely alive because of Devil's Breath, and is faced with a difficult decision: to use the cure and save Aunt May, or to let the sample be used for mass production and save everyone else. Whilst talking to Spider-Man, Aunt May asks him to take off his mask so she could see the face of her nephew. Peter, in shock, answers,
You knew?
Both role models, Otto and May, knew of Peter's secret identity.
You knew?
Otto didn't tell him so he could have leverage, keeping an eye and manipulate him. Otto almost killed Spider-Man knowing he was Peter. Aunt May knew for a long time and believed in what Peter was doing. Didn't want him to worry or get hanged back over she knowing and worrying about him. The last moments we get with both Aunt May and Otto shows Peter realizing they knew he was Spider-Man.
You knew?
Otto knowing Peter is Spider-Man is a total betrayal of their friendship.
You knew?
Aunt May knowing Peter is Spider-Man showed care, love, and support. Aunt May suffered alone all this time, knowing he was Spider-Man, and she kept it secret for his sake. One last time, Aunt May shows herself the cornerstone of Peter's ideals, helping him make the right decision. In the end, most of what happens in the game is a result of Norman's lack of ethic as a scientist and a businessman. He uses people for his own ends. He has no problem harming innocents, even if his goal was to save his son. We find a prototype helmet and goblin bombs in his apartment, and even though he ends up alive and with only a few setbacks, he was powerless due to Silver Sable's inability to protect him, and he was at the full mercy of Doc Ock, which probably made someone as prideful as Norman feel powerless. If there's one takeaway is that we haven't seen the end of Norman Osborn. The game is such an emotional roller coaster. Hopefully I managed to show just a little bit of why I enjoyed the story so much. So much heart and care put into it. I just can't wait to see what they'll do in the sequel.